This episode is brought to you by Ardan Labs Education. Sign up today to learn advanced concepts in Go, Docker, Kubernetes, Terraform, and more. Visit ardanlabs.com/education for more information.
Welcome to the Ardan Labs podcast. Our very, and I mean very, did I say very? No, I really mean very special guest today is Steve Francia. Dude, I can't believe I got you on this podcast. I thought the ask was going to be, yeah, Bill, but I'm busy. So, dude, this is amazing, bro. Super amazing, especially as busy as you are. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm just grateful to be here. And I was looking through the podcast at many of our friends who've appeared, and I thought, man, when is Bill going to ask me?
Yeah. Well, we got you on the show, so I guess the answer is now. I'm going to ask you
Now.
now. It's always this was the right moment. Okay, I couldn't do it too much sooner. Now is the right moment.
You worked out all the bugs with all the duds. Now you're ready for prime time.
Now, if it's possible that you don't know who Steve Francia is, I'm going to ask him to just give us his 2-minute sort of background about where he is today, just where you are today, Steve.
Today, sure. So I live in the New York City area. I work at a financial sciences company called Two Sigma, and I think we've branded that term ourselves, financial sciences. But the intent there is it's a quantitative hedge fund. We're using computers and lots of data to make predictions and then trade stocks based on those predictions, trade stocks and other tradable vehicles based on those predictions. My role is product lead of our investment management platform, which is really what the financial folks use to do everything from research to live trading.
That's wild stuff, man. What did you phrase this industry again? Financial
Sciences.
sciences. Dude, I can feel like that should be a university class now. Financial sciences. Almost a whole department in university.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It's very like if you think about the scientific method that you have theories and you're testing those theories, and it's very much follows that method, and that's what I think distinguishes us from all the other finance companies out there.
And product management is like right in your wheelhouse. Like that's what you've kind of, at least from the time that I've known you, maybe just before I known you, you were still doing. I mean, we're going to get into your past, but now I'm trying to remember when I first met you at, I guess it would be 2014. You were writing software, weren't you? I don't want to go too far because I want to get there, but just yes or no, you were writing software.
I have been writing software consistently since the mid 90s.
But then shortly as I got to know you, you've moved into these sort of product management roles and been really effective for the companies you've worked for.
I ever since I was very beginning of my career, I thought of myself as a product minded engineer, and now I think of myself as more of a engineering minded product person, product manager. But like I've always kind of straddled the two, and brought strategy to engineering and brought technical depth to product. So
All right, brilliant. So this is a podcast about you. We're going to kind of get a little bit of your story and how you got to where you are today. And so a couple of questions that I got to ask right out of the box. I got to age you first. So growing up in the U.S., what year did you graduate high school?
1997.
97. Dude, I got 10 years on you then. Oh my God. I don't know what year you were gonna say, but 97 was not in the so okay. Okay, that's fair. 10 years, that's fine. And now my favorite question to ask all my engineering friends. Don't think, clear your head, Steve. Don't think too hard. This has to be the first thing that pops in your head, you remembering the first time you were working on a computer where like you just had that moment we all have where we're just like, wow, or something cool?
I mean, the first, I probably have two experiences. One as a user and one as like a creator. But I think the creator one's a little more interesting, which was I was in high school. We had these calculators. I'm sure a lot of the viewers are familiar with them because they haven't really changed in 30 years. It's the TI 80 series of these graphing calculators, and um, I was in math class, so where you'd use a calculator, and we had all these homeworks, which were like all these homework assignments to do these very like apply this same thing over and over and over to a new set of inputs. And as I'm going through, I wonder if I could write some program, write some routine in this, and it supported BASIC, right? That was the only language it supported. I was like, I wonder if I could write something that effectively would do my homework for me. And so I did. And all of a sudden it went from like, the homework taking a long time to like press, a few buttons, enter. And like we were allowed to use these on tests and stuff. It really was a great year.
Wait. You wrote that code on the calculator?
Yeah. Yeah. That was the only way to input it then.
Did the teacher know that you had written this code on the calculator?
I don't remember asking for permission or forgiveness, but I don't think I mean, it worked out. I don't know.
So wait, I got questions here. So you got all this homework to do. It's a labor of love, and which is why it's being given to you, right? And you spend the time writing a program so the calculator just does it quicker. You don't have to how in some form or another. You're taking tests with this calculator. You're finishing before anybody, and the teacher's not wondering what's going on here.
Honestly, we're talking like 30 years ago, right?
That's
So who
wild, man.
remembers that
But
long ago?
you remember writing the code on the
Oh, it
calculator.
was very impressionable. Like I don't remember taking the test with it and like how the teacher reacted. That's a blur. But I very much remember the feeling of euphoria of like, oh, I could do this, right? And like at the time, I didn't know anything about software, and like there wasn't an internet yet, right? Like this was, I mean, not like we would think of it an internet, right? And and so like you the only people you talk to are your friends in person. Like that's the only people you know. And so like I didn't know software engineering culture or anything, but it turns out optimizing like automated tasks that you repeat over and over is a huge part of engineering. And so so I started with that very very young.
You grew up in the Northeast then? We're
Yeah, I
talking.
grew up in Connecticut, just
Okay,
outside New York City.
in Connecticut. Okay. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about your high school years because high school is when you have to start. If you listen to the show, you've heard me say this a million times. I'm not going to repeat it too much, but you start your 4 year cycle up until you're about 30, right? 4 years of high school, 4 years of whatever next schooling, 4 years of a job, and then you start to like just to keep up with your peers, right? Your peer group starts this 4 year cycle. So it's really formative years. So what what was Steve into entering into high school? Were you into sports? Were you into music? Was it just hanging out with friends? What was keeping you? What were you spending your time on?
At that point, I was into computers to some degree, video games, movies, and sports. I played soccer, basketball. Um, oh, and lacrosse. I played lacrosse. That was the
No,
third one.
lacrosse is a
It's like I
big.
had to do something. Yeah, yeah. In the town I grew up in, it was huge. At
Yeah,
the
it's
time,
huge
we
in the
were.
Northeast. But the lacrosse, there was always the fall sport, the winter sport, and then the spring sport, right? So I
Yeah,
always
so
ran track in the
soccer,
winter. Oh, soccer
soccer fall, basketball winter, lacrosse
in the
spring.
spring. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, so you're into sports, but you didn't have did you have a computer at home at that time?
I remember we had one called a laser, which was like before 286s. Um, whatever the chipset was right before 286. I don't remember if by high school I had more, but we didn't have Windows yet. Windows hadn't been released yet. Windows 95, like Windows 3.1 came out, and it just ran on top of DOS really. So you needed a pretty good computer to run it. We didn't have a good computer. We had a like hand me down.
But you had the computer in the house because your parents were using it, or they brought it to you guys for homework, or
We had a computer because my aunt gave us one, thinking that her old one. So we had one that was like already 4 years old.
it doesn't sound to me like you were that interested about it. Like it came into the house and it was, yeah, it was there, but
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely playing around at this point with BBSs. And for those listeners who were not as old as Bill and I, that was bulletin board service, which is when your computer would dial into someone else. Like someone would host a BBS at their house. They would have usually 1 to 3 phone lines that they'd be paying for, and people would dial in, and it was asynchronous. It was like the asynchronous local internet. Like you could log in, you're on it for a little while, people could upload files or messages or whatever, and then they'd sign off and someone else would dial in and look at those things and respond, and then you don't know anyone else that's on there, but like everyone's kind of dialing in, and so it really laid the foundation for a lot of the interactions that the internet then grew around. um, so things were happening, but it was early.
all right. What academically were you interested in then in high school, or you hadn't found it yet?
No, I was math and science um, were my big. Yeah, I was in all honors, math and science from early age.
Was there a particular science you cared about? The physics, the earth, the what is it? Chemistry. um, I remember chemistry. I was horrible. Physics, chemistry, earth science. I don't remember.
Yeah, physics probably, but not yet. Right, like physics was later in high school. At this point, biology and just kind of the sense of like experimentation, and we didn't really specialize in science until high school, so just kind of the sense of experimentation and like theories and trying to learn from the observation of the world around you um, was something I was really interested in. And on math, it was the ability to it was a very logical structure, which really spoke to how my mind worked. Whereas like foreign languages and even English are not as logical. Um, there's always exceptions and weird parts to them, and um, I hadn't really come to terms with appreciating the art form of those things yet.
So, did you consider yourself a good student? Did high school just come easy for the grades? You had to work hard.
I was not a good student, but it came easily. Right. So like I didn't do much. I did what I needed to get decent grades, but I wouldn't say I was a good student. I rarely studied. I didn't really know how to study yet. I could just kind of uh, just show up and do pretty well on all the tests, and enough that like depending on the class, a lot of them weighted homework very light, so I didn't do very much with that. Um, Usually indexed on the things that I needed to.
Sounds like you did enough to keep your parents off your back and to maintain a level of freedom
Yeah,
where you
that's right.
weren't in. Yeah,
That was the goal.
yeah,
That
I
was.
got it.
I wasn't thinking of college yet either. This like I wasn't thinking of my future. I was just thinking of yeah, keep keep attention away. Like that's the goal. Is like fly under the radar. Do well enough to not get attention on you.
I wasn't thinking about college at all until I became a senior, and I think that's only because everybody around me at that point is so focused on where they're going to school. I wasn't a good student. I really didn't want to go to college, but I didn't also not want to go to college because everybody was going to college. And I just felt like that was the next logical step. And nobody told me that it didn't have to be. Um, but I was really late to applying to schools. But I did know one thing. I did know that I did want to study computer science. That was absolutely what I wanted to do. So what was it going into your senior year? Because I imagine you had some of the same sort of situations. You knew you wanted to go to university and you knew you wanted to study something?
So a lot changed between entering high school and my senior year. I played. I ended up. I started skateboarding midway through high school, like kind of towards the first third of high school. Stopped playing sports, at least the high school level ones, and was very much like embracing the anti-establishment counterculture that was involved, like skateboarding and punk and hip hop and all of that. At New York at the time of the early '90s was like the place to be. Like there was just so much going on um, that there was a yeah. I really wasn't thinking of my future much. I was really thinking, like I think I'm quite blessed that I wasn't great at skateboarding because like I was good enough to be able to do demos and like competitions and stuff, but not good enough to win or like I was just good enough to participate, but not to like be at the front of it. And that closed that door, right? Like that door was very tightly shut. Like a life of skateboarding is not for you. Musically, not it was not up to par to have a life as a musician. And so, but that's where a lot of my passion was in doing those things. And then my secondary, like, so that was kind of my outward thing. And then I spent a lot of high school working at an internet service provider, and had fallen into during that high school time, uh, you know, like if you've never seen the movie Hackers, that was kind of our inspiration, and like a lot of that was taken out of the culture that we grew up in, and so that was there was like kind of two sides of like skate punk and and then like hacking in the sense of like not so much of like trespassing hacking, but more in the sense of like just doing something innovative with computers.
You were living that life, honestly, then, because if you had a job hacking on computers, and then you'd go grab your skateboard and or with a group of the kids doing that. But were any of your other skateboarder friends also into computers or doing anything with them like you were?
Yeah, a few. We had a few of us worked at the same internet company, um, and some were more like on the art side of things, but there was definitely there was a mix of folks in that skate crew, and some of which, like I'm still friends with many of them today, and a lot of them got into computers too. So it was an interesting. There was some overlaps between those two cultures as well.
I'm kind of interested from a high school perspective how you got that job and why you got that job. Was it that you just wanted to make money and you found this? How do you get this job?
My first job was working at a video rental store because I've always loved movies. That's another passion of mine. So the idea that I could rent them for free and like watch them when we were at work. I mean, watch them like they're on the screens as you're like actually working, but like you get access to them. And this is back in the day before there was, I mean, way back in the day before streaming, there were you had to like go to a store and buy physical
Or rent
DVDs
for
or
24 hours?
VHS.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, but so there's a at the beginning of that home rental market, that home video market, the movies cost over $100. And so the only way you could really afford them was renting them because no one's buying a VHS tape for
I
$100
didn't know they
unless
were
it's
that
like
much. I didn't know those
yeah,
stores were paying 100
that's
bucks.
that's in 90s prices. And Disney did something innovative where they were doing direct to consumer rather than direct to rental. And they started lowering their prices to, whatever, the 20 to $30 range. But then they had the vault where they only out for a certain amount of time. And so they created, their own kind of way of doing that. And eventually Disney's model started catching on more and more and the prices started coming down. But even then, there was usually a big window where it was priced very high for rentals. And then 6 months later, it came to the home market where it was a reasonable price for people to buy. But there was that always that time period where it was like for rentals first, which you even see today. Like a lot of things are available for purchase before they get to streaming, right? It's like that same separation of like they can get a premium at the beginning. Um, so anyway, that was my first job.
Dude, I remember renting a movie for $2 or $3, not thinking about that. That was easy. But I didn't realize that you had to rent that 40 times before you can make a profit on it.
Although late fees helped with that, yeah. But but yeah, it was actually it was a pretty challenging strategic job because you needed to know how many titles to purchase too, right? Because the worst thing is everyone come in, they want to see Titanic or whatever that big movie is, and it's sold out, and then they go to another store, and so you really had to kind of time it right. But and you could always sell them at the end of that. You could sell them too, so you didn't have to rent it necessarily 30 times to be profitable because you could sell it for $20-$30 after you'd rented it if they weren't damaged. And those tapes, like there's a lot of mechanical things happening, so the tapes get worn down. But anyway, this is taking me back a long, long way.
So that was your first sort of
So
high school
that was
job.
my first job. So I did that for a year. Um, and it was fine. But I remember thinking to myself, you look to the future and you see the managers of this place, and I thought, this is not where I want to be. Like retail is not for me. I just don't like working with customers and at this direct level. So I was in a class with one of my friends, and both of us were doing different hacking stuff. We were on the same BBSs together, and he had gotten a job at this internet provider. It was brand new. Like the idea of dial-up internet was brand new, like within the last year, and so companies were starting to emerge, providing the dial-up service, and they call it T1, which was like a dedicated channel to like mostly companies at that point, and those were like 1 megasecond, 1.5 megasecond, so like really, they could really fast compared to the dial-up. But anyway, he'd gotten a job there, and we were talking in class one day, and he's like, "Yeah, you should just come work with me." So I went in, interviewed, I started doing tech support. Like people would call up and they couldn't get on the internet, so I'm the guy helping them with that. But eventually, that grew into helping to. So I worked there for 4 years. I worked there for most of high school, and then a year, and then summers and stuff at college. Um, so 4 years, and by the end, I was our Unix systems administrator, and uh, we were programming different things. It was more scripting rather than writing like full programs, but um, there was some full programming too. We built one of the first e-commerce platforms,
Are you building
or one of the
websites
first
too?
e-commerce sites. Yeah, we built the so like it's kind of silly, but you remember back in the 90s, advertising, the commercials were a lot more than they are now. Like they were like works of art, and there was we did one for Slim Jim, a website for Slim Jim. Macho Man Randy Savage did a photo shoot and
Bite into
everything.
a Slim Jim. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. So yeah, we did e-commerce and marketing websites, and it was for like 16, 17 year old. I felt like I was at the cutting edge of everything. It was like amazing.
Okay, slow down here because you're doing that all through high school. I'm imagining it's part time. You're working like 15 hours a week or something. I don't know. I mean, you still
A
have to go to school.
little more, like 20, yeah, probably.
Dude, you must have been making decent money at that point, even if it's minimum wage. You have more money you know what to do with at that age.
No, I knew what to do with it. Pay for car insurance, pay for
You bought a car.
food, clothing. Eventually, it was pay for college,
Talk to me about now you're about to
pay
graduate
for
high.
skateboards. Like skateboards weren't cheap. I broke them constantly. I was always like jumping down big things and breaking skateboards.
But I guess you're thinking you're going to go to college for computer science at that point.
Yeah, so at that point, I knew I wanted to do computers. I didn't know if college was the path I was going to take there. I actually kind of applied as a whim at the beginning of my senior year. And I only applied to two schools, and got accepted to one, which was my preferred school, and then I got rejected from the second one.
And which schools are these?
So the two schools were BYU in Utah and BYU Idaho, which is like the junior. It was at the time it was like the junior college. Now it's a full 4 year university, but at the time it was only a 2 year school.
So there were no schools in New York that you thought you wanted to go to.
Now for me it was I don't think, like I said, I didn't give a ton of thought to it, but at the time BYU and still is today is among the best value of an education. I knew I was paying my own way.
But you know what doesn't make sense to me? You know what doesn't make sense to me?
Yeah.
You're this New York punk hacker kid skateboarding, right? Like you're living this northeastern sort of life, and you decide that you're going to leave all that and go to Utah, where it's all culturally upside down from where you are. And I don't understand how that's appealing to you at the time.
There a little more goes into faith though too. BYU is one of like I think of BYU and Notre Dame as pretty similar schools and cultures. Both of them are higher, like good, strong schools, but with a clear religious affiliation to them. And the idea of being able to be in a place with similar view, like similar approaches to things, is anyone who knows our faith knows that drinking is not part of it. And yet, most people in high school and college, drinking is very much a part of it. So, to be in a place where there wasn't all that pressure and culture around drinking, but you could feel like you were having fun and not be a part of that was a pretty appealing thing.
So you're a practicing Mormon going through high school, and your faith was an important part of sort of who you were.
I would say yeah, it's a weird mix of all these things. It really is, but there's harmony to it all.
Are your friends Mormon too, or you're hanging out with a mix of
Always,
all,
always a mix.
always a mix? That's interesting. So you decide that you do want to get the college education, and you need to do it in a place that aligns with your faith. Is it so you can stay out of trouble?
So, growing up in New England, there's not very many Latter Day Saints. Right? It's pretty sparse, and so like I not pretty much none of my skateboarder friends or my hacker friends were aligned with me there. Although they were supportive of it, but not wasn't aligned. And then I go to BYU, and there's more alignment. Everyone, all of my friends that are skateboarders are also people I go to church with, and like it just felt more aligned. And and I learned a lot from that. One was I really felt like it was what I needed at the time. It's a very development time of your year, of your life. It's also the case I knew I wanted to serve a 2 year mission as common in our faith, and it's easy to do that at BYU. It's hard to do that other places. Um, Harder to do it other places. And so it was a great environment for me to like flourish and really figure out who I was, be around people that were of a similar thing, and I also learned, man, that's I want to be in a place with diversity of thought. And so when I was done with BYU, I was ready to come back to like the melting pot of America, it's New York City. And like I really, from that, I think developed a deep sense of who I was. And part of that is I'm, I grew up in Fairfield County, Connecticut. It's half New England, half New York City, and it's got culture aspects of both of those things. And but the New York side you pick up is just like strong diversity of thought, strong acceptance of everyone, in this weird like blended way of everyone's kind of no one's a majority, so everyone's a New Yorker, which New Yorkers don't look like anyone else. It's all this like hodgepodge of things, and like that was really appealing to me to come back to.
When you get to BYU, I'm guessing that you're going to study. Is your plan to study computer science there?
My plan was to study computer science. My plan did not succeed,
Okay.
but that was my plan.
Did you end up graduating from BYU?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What'd you get a degree in?
So I ended up with a degree in philosophy. Um, but I have to give some explanation to this.
Yes, because as your parent right now, I'm thinking that sounds great, but how are you going to get a job with a philosophy degree?
So I go to BYU, and the curriculum is very academic. The computer science curriculum is very academic, but not very practical. And I'd come out of this experience of being like what I thought is the cutting forefront of really what was pushing the next wave of computers, right? The internet was like really where it was. We were pushing the envelope there. And then I felt like I was, and this is from the perspective of a 18-year-old kid, right? Not the wisdom, exactly the amount of wisdom you'd expect from a teenager. I was just like, I just felt like I was going nowhere fast, learning all these theories that were not applicable. I was like, I just want to build cool stuff. Um, and I felt like I wasn't really learning enough. So um, after not great freshman year, not just in computers, just in general, I still hadn't learned how to study because my high school experience did not properly prepare me. Turns out I couldn't use the same techniques in college that I used in high school to succeed. So at the end of my freshman year, I did a 2-year mission in East LA, and then came back. And on my mission, I learned how to study. Came back, thought, oh, I'll do computer science, and the same experience repeated. I just felt like I was in the wrong place, learning like I felt like I was going backwards, and I was like, I'm really here to learn. Like if I'm going to be at these 4-year schools, I didn't come to get a piece of paper. I came here to actually learn something. And so I tried a bunch of classes. Like I tried business classes, linguistics, Near Eastern studies. Like I was just sprinkling everything, English, and like was trying to maybe I'll become an English major. Um, and then I took a philosophy class, and it just clicked. And it turned out that for me, my objective of like learning the most I possibly could in my time there was best accomplished in philosophy. And in philosophy, I learned how to learn and how to think, and that skill is the most valuable skill I could possibly obtain. I had the with and all of this is with the everyone else was pre med or pre law except for me, um, but I was pre computer. Like I knew I wanted to go into the computer field and build cool stuff. I didn't know what shape that was going to take, but I felt like philosophy was the best use of my time at the university.
By the time you graduate, it's 2005, right? I mean, that's taking you 6 years.
2004. Yeah.
2004. Okay. 2004. And now you have this philosophy degree. You're 2004. So you're 5 years now of technology changes from the time you were in high school.
Yeah, but I worked all of college too.
What were you doing when you were working at college? You work in computers too?
Yeah, yeah, the whole time. So my freshman year, like I said, I put myself through. Like I grew up a single parent family. Uh, no, my mom's a teacher, just no money. So I had to pay my whole way through, and so my freshman year, I worked at internet website building company, just building websites built.
They're in Utah or the one that you were
No, a
in?
new one in Utah.
They
I
must have
think
loved
I
you when
built.
you walked in with the experience you had.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was good. I think I built 400 websites in that 8 months. Like I was just churning them out.
What tech were you using to build those websites? You weren't using like front page Microsoft.
No, we were using Dreamweaver, writing HTML, a lot of HTML by code. Like they were using Dreamweaver templates. It might have been doing that still then. That might have been slightly before that. PHP, I think, was part of the mix. This is 19, it couldn't be PHP yet. This is 1997, 98. It must have just been Dreamweaver.
This makes sense now, Steve. Now it makes sense. You're working
Yeah,
day in and
so
day out doing computer science stuff. You're doing engineering, practical stuff, and then you're expected to go into a classroom and learn what you knew you were never going to use on the job.
it turns out that was wrong. I did end up using it on the job, but I had to learn it outside of the classroom.
But I could see where you're.
But at the time, that was my thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my thinking. I had no idea where my career was going to take me.
No, but now in your brain that you're being super productive because you're getting the computer stuff on the job, and now you can study philosophy in school, and you're kind of really being productive in terms of your learning. Like I get that now.
That's what I did my freshman year. Then after my mission, I came back, worked for a company in Connecticut over the summer, uh, writing code. This was ASP, um, which was the platform they wanted us to write or like use. Not ASP.NET, the original ASP. It was rough. But At the end of my summer job with them, they wanted me to stay on, drop out of school, and come full time. I was like, no, I'm going back to school. I'm going to finish my degree. But they said, okay, then why don't you just start a company and we'll hire your company to do it.
And work
So I did.
remote.
And work remote. So I hired a company. I started a company. They were our first client. We ended up switching it to PHP and not ASP once we had more flexibility with them, and ended up hiring 10 employees, maybe 12 in that ballpark, ran it through all of the rest of college.
Time out. You're gonna do a 2-year mission. So you're running this business while you're on mission?
No, no, this starts after my mission.
After your mission. Okay. So for 3 years, you're going to school and you're running a company where you got 10 people.
Yeah, it was actually maybe 3.5, 4 years because my freshman year I had to make up for. But yeah, that's the general sense. Yeah.
So I guess you're thinking now that you graduate with your philosophy degree that you're just going to grow this company.
That would be a logical thing. That was not what I ended up with. Um, I actually thought I had it all wrong with computers and wanted to be a philosophy professor.
Oh, now that you got this degree and you loved it so much.
I love, I still love, I love metaphysics, epistemology, like that.
But now you
Uh,
got to go to graduate school.
so I graduate December of 2004. By this point, I'm also married with a child, um, which is why you might think I'm older than I am, because I started my family uh, relatively young. Um, and I'm thinking of being a professor. And so I'm applying to some of the best philosophy programs in the world. And but the acceptance isn't until the fall, right? Like nothing starts, classes don't start until the fall. And so recognizing that was my next step. I start winding the company down, and because it was just a consulting company, like we didn't have our own IP.
Why wind it down? You needed income. You had a wife, you have a child, you need income.
Because in my head, I didn't think I could do a PhD program and run a company at the same time. And if that's my path, then like I said, it's a consulting company, not a lot of IP of its own. Mostly, we're doing work for hire, so we just don't take on new clients. And so we did. We started load shedding and not taking on new clients, and that turned out to work faster than I expected. So I graduate. We move back to Connecticut. I guess to Connecticut because my wife is not from Connecticut. So I moved to Connecticut, and then my wife says to me, she goes, "You know, you've got 6 months until school starts. What are you going to do? Like you shut down things too quickly. And I thought, yeah, I should do something. And so a recruiter reaches out to me from a company in New York City, a startup, and I take the job. And um, 6 months later, well, within the next few months, I withdraw my application
Oh.
from school, and I'm like, this is where I want to be.
How did they find you? How did the recruiter find you? You put your resume out there and they found
I
you?
don't remember at this point.
They just found you. What was this job that
I
you
remember his name, but I don't remember how he found me.
So what is this job? So now we're talking 2003,
No, 2005.
2005. So what is this job you take that stops you from pursuing your PhD in
So a little context. The dot-com bubble burst, and in New York at this time period, there's not the scene there is now. It was like Silicon Valley is where all the exciting startups were. In New York, you had media startups and some financial ones, and like ads, right? But that's like what most of New York tech is. Um, and this was a social media startup, and it was combining sports and social media. It's called Tackle, um, and it was about also just remember Facebook existed at this point, but barely. I think it was limited only to high school or college kids, or whatever. Like it wasn't broadly open yet. Like most people probably don't remember, but when Facebook came out, it had a staged opening, and there was just a lot of interest in this idea of social media and how it was going to flourish. And so we thought build one around sports. Through college, I ended up playing soccer and frisbee and a bunch of and a bunch of intramural sports on top of that. And um, so yeah, and skateboarding, and I liked, and X Games was just starting to come out at this point. And so we skateboarding went from the back alley getting chased by policemen type thing to Tony Hawk just did the 900, and the video games. I can't remember what year they came out, but it wasn't too far from that time point. So like there's this big emergence of this, and so the idea that we could have uh, a social network around sports was just super appealing. Um, and I was
So what did you get hired to do there? You got hired to build the websites out?
yeah I was like I don't remember something like lead developer. They already had a staff of a few people. I had to hire some more. Um, and I worked there for several years. About a year into it, they transitioned to have me be like VP of engineering, um, and lead the team and make decisions.
Were you excited about that at the time? You were young, you're in your 20s, and suddenly
Yeah, I thought it
you're a
was amazing.
VP?
Yeah, the excite. Well, it was a young company, and it was a small company, so VP is a bit of an uh, you know it was like running a team of 12 or something, but it felt very exciting. It felt like we could change the world and be the next Facebook. And um, like there was, yeah, I was just grateful to be a part of it and have that experience. And
And you're
um,
supporting your family at that point. And is at any time while you're there doing this, is the philosophy nagging in the back of your head, or you've just let that go?
no, the excitement of this took over.
So how long are you at this company then? You started in 2005.
2 years. I'm there for 2 years.
You're there for 2 years, and you grow pretty quickly in that company. But what happens 2 years later that you're ready to move on?
Our growth started plateauing. Um, and we did this, we invested big in this big redesign, and it didn't have the intended effect. And so, and like, you know, the VC is interesting. Like it was VC funded, but at the time, New York wasn't like the place to get VC funding. And it was tough. We pitched to a lot of investors. Didn't get didn't get much. Eventually, found an acquisition, but it wasn't. They weren't trying to grow it more. They just wanted the brand.
They wanted to buy it and bury it.
No, they leveraged the brand,
Oh,
but
okay.
they didn't want to take the whole team and everything. They had their own
Yes.
development team.
So the writing was on the wall. You knew it was time to move on. You weren't gonna. You didn't really want to stay. So this is now 2000. You said what? 2 years. So 2007.
Yeah, 2007.
And now, what are you thinking? You're just gonna throw your resume back out there and start looking again?
Uh, no, there was, kid. At this point, I had by 2007, I had my third child. So we had one in 2006, one in 2007. So three, lots of mouths to feed. You don't, like I was leveraging my network and trying to like figure out what was next. And someone, I don't remember how I got connected to the next company, but I already that there was already another company that I was. Um,
So you must quickly get that job before you're let go.
yeah, I don't. There was no letting go, but it was clear that we weren't we weren't on a growth trajectory anymore, right? It was more of a like stable trajectory. So if there was opportunities to go somewhere, I think we were probably encouraged to do so.
So what's this next company you decide that you're gonna start working at?
So the next company is a e-commerce company called Portero. It was at the time eBay's largest luxury seller, and they decided to spin off into their own platform. And it was I'm not a luxury person, but I thought it was interesting to learn how that whole world worked, and it was a great opportunity. I joined as COO and led operations as well as technology. It was just a fantastic learning experience.
You went in there as an executive,
That's right. Yep.
but you're still not even in your 30s yet, are you?
28 maybe.
And so your job isn't to write code at this point. Your job is to build the organization to sell these luxury products online.
Yeah.
Was these products they own, new ones, or this isn't like resell?
It's a secondary market. So their goal was to build this big secondary market for luxury goods.
It's funny, dude, because there's two sites right now that advertise, I think on CNN every night. The Real Real, and I can't remember the other one, but they're like, it's this market. It's Gucci and somebody else's Gucci bag, and the secondary market for this stuff.
That's the
So
market.
it's still happening. I find it interesting when you see every decade another company. You see this in real estate a lot. A new real estate company basically selling the same thing, but trying to pitch it as new.
There's a lot of cycles out there. A lot of like I see this everywhere. Like in technology, the more you learn about technology history, you're going to see the same ideas come again with slight twist to them always because the context is different because it's at a new time and the environment's different, but things cycle.
How long are you with this company trying to, now you're building, big
So
end,
I'm with this
yeah,
company for 3 years,
3 years.
and
Okay.
yeah, we were growing like gangbusters. Like it was just every month we were like exponential growth in revenue. Things were great. And then the market soured, not the luxury market, the US market.
Yeah, we're talking 2008 now. So crash.
2008 happens, the crash happens, and overnight, uh, like what goes first?
All the non-essentials. Yeah. All the non-essentials.
Um, and so all of a sudden, it
Gone.
just yeah, it like literally happened overnight. We were like we were celebrating, things were like we were passing all of our goals, we were doing great, and then all of a sudden,
Yeah. Nobody's got cash to buy that anymore. They're worried about losing their homes at this point.
yeah.
So what happens now you're in a tough environment. So you're working. there's no more revenue coming in. What happens? What do you do next?
Try and pivot the company, figure out what we can salvage as the whole everything shifted. So we shifted with it. And I had the good fortune to work with. One of the things we did was partner with this little art startup called. Um, they had this product called Magento, and it was a e-commerce open source e-commerce platform, and we worked with them to build out some a different style of selling, which we then tried to pivot the company around, um, which worked well for them. A lot better for them as the platform than it worked as like the technology provider than it worked out for us, as our market just continued to disappear. So then it was how can we do our what's right for the company by our investors, and figure out how to get the most value that we can.
And so the idea now was to sell.
Yeah, it was a big roller coaster, high highs and then low lows, and we're pitching to different VCs to get more funding. For those who've never participated in that, like your goal is to raise enough to get you just enough runway to get you to the next threshold where you can raise at a higher valuation. And usually the ballpark they say is like between 12 and 24 months. And it depends on market conditions and a lot of other things, but it's rare that you'd have a lot of cash in the bank. Like you really wanted just enough. If you raise too much, then you're giving up too much of the company at a lower valuation. So you really wanted to get that timing right. Um, and it was tough. It was a really tough. Like we pitched to every major VC, um, and there it was tough. It was really tough. Great learning experience, but tough.
So you try that for a year, I imagine, and then you run out of cash, right?
I, I mean, again, I think that's speaking a little too much, but like we ended up, it's still around as a company, but we had to make significant compromises to continue.
But you decide now it's time to move on.
Yeah, the only way to continue to do it in the current market was to significantly downsize the company, which I helped make the decision around, and also, was one of the people to be downsized.
So where do you go next?
So after this, I I don't remember how I got connected with this next company, but there there was a startup based in New York, with a bunch of ex about.com guys, and they'd made out great with about.com, and they wanted to start the new thing, and it was the idea of uh, a lot of these ideas are interesting. They the right idea, but not always at the right time. And so this one was the idea that the world is changing, and before you needed to be on TV or newspaper or something to have like an influence and be able to do it. But now anyone with a blog or a YouTube channel can be an influencer. And so we thought, how can we, like, we saw the opportunity of a lot of people are doing, I think the term they used at the time was like mommy bloggers, where we were talking about the different products that they were using as they were, they kind of expanded their network. But there were cooking bloggers, and it was just this, a lot of these influencers just talking about the different things they did, but no way to monetize this. And we thought, well, how can we make this? How can we solve this problem? We see this big opportunity. So the company's called Open Sky, and it, a lot of it just spoke to me. I was like, I love the idea of democratizing things and making it so that there's no barrier to entry. Anyone with you know effectively with like a video camera could start their own thing. There wasn't this big upfront. You need to have some gatekeeper put you on a TV show, but like you could do it yourself. And the idea that we could have authentic reviews of things, and people really, uh, uh, you know, help other, like, it's kind of breaking down gatekeepers in both ways. Like, you didn't need to be on Walmart shelves to be able to sell. If you had a neat product that spoke to people, you would have a channel through these influencers where you could sell it. So it really was breaking down barriers in multiple places to democratize commerce.
But what you were trying to solve is to get that advertising space around the video or in the video.
Uh, no. So what we ended up doing was create a marketplace where we had sellers come on that were selling, like, not like the Walmart's, Targets, but people that were smaller, that were creating like innovative products. They might sell at those bigger places, but they're looking for a distribution channel.
The only thing I can think of is like Etsy. Is this like Etsy pre-Etsy?
It's pretty similar to Etsy, yeah, but with the difference of combining influencers and sellers and consumers all together. So it's these like three different groups, um, and so I joined as VP of engineering, and it we thought it was a great idea. We actually built and patented the first ever distributed shopping cart, where this thing, you could put on different blogs and it would work across multiple blogs on different domains, like really innovative things that. Um, but at the end of the day, it turned out we were too early, and we learned that it felt unauthentic once the influencers started selling things. It felt like they were shilling instead of giving authentic reviews. And of course, nowadays, that's not the like nowadays this is normal, but back then it hadn't tipped yet. The consumers weren't ready for it, and so we ended up going through a major pivot. And the major pivot was to keep the core idea, but then go after bigger influencers. So Martha Stewart was one of the people who joined the site. So instead of being like small time bloggers, it became celebrity driven. Um, and that did a lot better. That really caught wind, and the site did well. Um, and we ended up building out a great technology platform to do these very solve some really challenging problems from a technical standpoint that e-commerce uh, were part of the nature of e-commerce. And one of those was that we couldn't model, like, relational databases weren't the right thing to model catalog data. It didn't work. You couldn't really map it in the right way. Magento took an interesting approach to that problem, which I was very familiar with my previous one, but their approach was at the cost of scaling. Um, like, it worked well at small scale, but we were much larger scale than Magento would scale up to, so it really struggled at the scale we were. And so we looked for a different database that might satisfy our requirements, and that led to the next company,
MongoDB, object
MongoDB,
database.
object database.
Wow. So you have this problem of a lot of different data that's changing and you have to adapt to it quickly. You can't structure it. You discover MongoDB. So you end up bringing MongoDB into this solution.
Yeah, we adopted MongoDB very early. Ended up being one of the first websites at all to use MongoDB. The first e-commerce site for sure, um, and then ended up speaking at their conferences. Like, they had a very early conference in New York City. The company was very small, and I got to speak at that, and that led to getting to know the team better and better, and all of that led to them wanting me to join.
So what was the position they offered you at some point?
So this is now we're in 2011, and it was an interesting one. So the company, so when I first started interacting with them, it was Dwight and Elliot, the two founders, at a table with two engineers, and that was the whole company. There were just four people. They didn't have an office. They were just four people sitting at a table.
They were all engineers though, right? Elliot was a
all engineers, four
Yeah,
engineers,
they're all banging on
two
code.
two founders and two more junior engineers. And then and we worked with them for a year. And by the time that year passed, they were up to maybe 20 people. They had their own office. And I'm talking with Elliot and Dwight pretty regularly, and they're just like, telling me the exciting things that they're doing. I clearly caught onto the vision by this point, and so they're just saying, why don't you come join us? And I was like, well, what are we talking about? They're like, uh, you know, come join us and we'll figure it out together. I was like, oh, that's a big leap of faith. But I already had the vision. I really believed in Dwight and Elliot. I knew how smart they were, um, and joined. And it took me several months before I figured out what the right role was.
And what was that role? Because you weren't going to be engineering.
It wasn't well, it is engineering, but not in the so at the time, all of their pretty much everyone was people with advanced degrees, tons of experience in C++, and their like master's theses or PhDs research was around database design, and that was what the makeup was. And then there's me, self-taught hacker, mostly script languages like PHP, Python, Perl, Ruby, and I'm like, what can I do? And I remember having a conversation with Elliot where I was there maybe, I don't know, 4 weeks, and I went to Elliot. I was like, I just don't know why you hired me. Like, I'm nothing like the rest of these people. Like that like culture, everything, experience, everything's different. And Elliot looks at me and he goes, "That's why I hired you, because we need someone that thinks different than they do." And that led to the role of the title, which we made up. It's a made up title, but it was Chief Developer Advocate. And what it was someone to focus on the MongoDB experience and making sure that it spoke to developers. And developer, we learned there's not like a developer. Every language is its own developer culture. Sometimes within a language, there's multiple developer cultures, and so we had to figure out a way to make this database work with those. And because we had SQL was a nice interface that other databases had the benefit of, and it's one. It doesn't matter what language it is because it's its own thing. But MongoDB, we wanted it to be idiomatic and native to those languages. So we need to think through how to make a universal experience that felt idiomatic in every language.
You needed to make sure that the average developer had the ability to use the database without much pain. And so you must have been, so then your idea is we're going to build language-based client libraries that just work for every average developer, regardless of their stack.
That was the vision.
Wow. They hadn't, I guess they didn't have the resources for that.
I think if I didn't communicate enough, it was very very early on, like pre 1.0. Like I remember when I joined, there was I think dbrankings.com was this. I think it's it's some website that ranks all the databases by popularity using whatever metrics it uses, and we were in the 40s. To give a sense of like, if you could name 40 databases, I'd be very impressed. Just so like there was a bunch of databases you'd never heard of ahead of where we were. That's how early this was.
Yeah, and I used the wrong words. I didn't mean they didn't have the resources. I meant, I guess they were so busy building the engine and the database that they didn't even have time to think about the developer experience.
I wouldn't say they didn't think about it. They did think about it. That's why they hired me.
Okay.
But you're right in that their focus was on getting the foundation right, and it's a challenge. You've got to like building a database is no small task. You've got to make sure that all, especially a scalable one, a distributed one, right? There's a lot of challenges to do. What MongoDB set out to do, and then to layer an idiomatic interface experience on top of that is just really challenging.
What was the first language you targeted in this role?
So they already had drivers in a few languages, but none of them were, and we called them drivers, but client libraries would be the term we'd use today. Um, they already had a Python one, and I think they had a Perl
I
one
imagine they had one in
and
C.
a Java one. They did not have a C one, but they did have a Java one. I think at least those three. I think there was one more, but it was,
Who had built those? One of the four engineers that we're talking about?
yeah, it was mostly Christina who wrote the book, was the primary author of them, and there was another engineer named Kyle who helped write them. He was mostly the Python one, if I remember right. And brilliant engineers. And Elliot gave guidance to this, but yeah, brilliant engineers, but they didn't have a holistic vision yet of how this is going to be. In fact, there was pretty different experience between the different languages at the time.
I want to move on from here, but I have to ask this question because I remember at some point that was a pretty big team, and you were, where the team was at least really focused on wanting to provide an idiomatic client library for every language. But it would have been easier if you went down the Amazon path and did it in a way where it could just be generated and you could produce client libraries for a lot of languages and maintain that with a probably smaller resources, but maybe not as idiomatic. Can you talk a little bit about that? Did that ever come up?
Yes, all the time. Like we knew. Look, at this point, there had not in the history of computer science, in the history of our industry, there had never been a database that was not a relational database that was successful. There were some that had limited success, but not really that entered the mainstream. And so that's a huge challenge. In addition to that, you've got, really Oracle is the runs the industry. And so in a business standpoint, you've got one of the biggest, most competitive companies leading that industry, and they're the kings of relational databases, and that's the only thing. Even the other clones like MySQL and Postgres are really just relational databases of the same, you know, spirit as the Oracle one. And so the idea of competing in this, it's audacious. Like the idea that a startup can compete and convince the world that you don't need a relational database and you can trust this startup company with your workload instead of, the established players, IBM and Oracle and Microsoft. Just audacious, absolutely audacious. I loved it. Right, this is like the punk rock ethos of like, we're going to do it better. But we knew that to do it, we had to do it significantly better. And the place we could differentiate was in both places, right? Like we could differentiate on the server side, and we had brilliant people working on that, and we could differentiate on the experience. And that was my job, to build out the team that could create the idiomatic experiences that just felt natural and really part of the language. And so that was it. And doing it, like, we couldn't compromise, right? If we compromised with generators, and believe me, the idea came out many times, or different ideas of doing, well, what if we used a core thing, that core library, and then everything called into that core library. These ideas all emerged, and had merit to them, but um, it's, to use something, the challenge is to do something that worked in Java, which you can't write a C library in the same way that you could for the C-based languages like Python and PHP. Um, was a real challenge. Like you always needed something for JVM and C-based things that were different, and then to do something that worked in, PHP single-threaded, uh, very different model than something like a multi-threaded. language, and with all the different variations, it was, you know, all the solutions had too many disadvantages except for build them all and really strong coordination across them, like really strong multi-language specs or requirements.
When I found Mongo in 2013, which we really needed, we couldn't use a relational database. We were getting data feeds, and maybe if we were lucky, maybe 50% of the schema was the same, but we wanted to store the other 50% in a way we could use it. Like MongoDB was brilliant for us there. But if it wasn't for the Gustafo's work on that Go client library, it would not have been an option, right? Like at the end of the day, if that doesn't exist, I just can't use it. And so, and the
Exactly right.
fact that it was idiomatic Go all the way through, and we know how good of a developer he was.
And if you wanted to like think through what was the difference between MongoDB's approach and the other non-relational databases, that remember we were 40th, we were at the end of the non-relational database list. The difference was that we tried to build a better, I mean, there were multiple differences, but one big difference that really stands out is tried to build that idiomatic experience.
All right. So how long are you there at Mongo? You're there you got there
Three
in
and a half years.
2000. I'm trying to remember now. We've been talking for so long. You got there in 2009,
2011.
2011. And how long are you there for?
3.5 years.
3.5 years. So 14. So we're heading into 2015. And what happens? You decide you've done what you want to do there, or you get a better opportunity. What happens next?
In addition to the things that we've been talking about, that's my career, like you put in a resume. Um, but I'm also doing open source the whole time, ever since before they even called it open source. I've been participating in open source. So back in 2001, I built one of, if not the first, object-oriented framework for PHP. The idea of a web framework wasn't a thing yet, but and I was working on my Vim config that turned out to, catch on quite a bit. Um, and so I've been involved with the open source community, and with MongoDB, I was involved with that open source community. That's how I got involved with the conferences. And so I'm doing open source stuff in addition to this. And so MongoDB we were growing. We grew incredibly fast. The 3.5 years I was there, we built out this great team. I remember um, there was a 3 month stretch where I hired a new person every week, um, and like just rapid hiring throughout the whole thing, building up this team. Um, and we get to the point um, where MongoDB is kind of a bit of a crossroads, and we needed to figure out how to affect. There was kind of two sides of the team. There was the server side and the client side. We need to figure out a way to get them to talk more and to integrate more. And while I was there, we orchestrated the first ever release where everything was released at the same time. So before that, drivers had their own, the client libraries had their own independent release schedule from the server, but customers didn't want that. They wanted one release of everything that spoke to everything at the same protocols and updates. Um, and so we had to coordinate that, and it was a large effort. And we actually had to make a big fundamental change. That was the catalyst to let us do this, which was early MongoDB had uh, the default setting was to write and forget. And so you'd send a write and you never followed up to see if that write was successful. And there could be network issues or whatever it is. You just fired and forget. And with the original use case that Dwight and Elliott built it around, that was a really intelligent setting. It made a lot of sense for what the use case they targeted. But the one that ended up being what people were using it for, it didn't make sense at all. It was hurting customers who didn't know that that was the default. And so we decided to change the default, and that required this big coordinated release across everybody. And it was just a large effort to get everyone on the same schedule and to make sure that, you know, every time the server needed to add a feature, the clients needed to add that to the protocol and be able to be in lockstep. And what we realized was having two different leads of each of these teams was hindering that coordination. And so we made the decision the best thing for the company was to merge them into one team. And and the right person was the head of the server team, which was a guy named Dan. And it went well. It definitely helped move us forward, but it left me without a position as Dan took it. And so I remember working with Dwight and Elliot, and they offered, we brainstormed different things. But like my first thing was, what's the best thing for the company, and like what's the best thing for the team? I was convinced it was this. In fact, I was the one who suggested the idea of merging the teams together, knowing that what the outcome was going to be. But I remember talking to Dan about it, and he was like, you've done great. His advice was, he's like, you built this big team here. You're leaving. If you leave now, you're leaving on a high. If you stay around for 6 months trying to figure out the next thing, he's like, you're not gonna be as fulfilled. It's not gonna be as good for you. And that really settled in with me. I thought, yeah, I think he's right. It's the right time. It's kind of like Seinfeld. Like, leave when you're on top. Don't leave when you're canceled. Right.
I was thinking of it more like the quarterback who really needs to retire, and like Manning retired, right? He won his Super Bowl and he left, and then you get Brady who should have retired and he didn't, or Brett Favre. So yeah, that to me is the analogy.
It, that was it, and it was great advice, and I think he was right. And so we did the right thing for the team and for the company. And it was one of the most difficult decisions I made, because my heart was there. I loved the product. I loved the community. I loved everything that we built. But I knew the seasons had changed, and it was time to move. Um, and so, also at this time period, I had, and this leads us to when you and I started interacting more and more. While I'm at MongoDB, I discover Go. We all discover Go, right? Like, the Go didn't exist before then, and and I was at the right vantage point because I was leading engineering across all these different languages, leading strategy of how we're going to adopt them, what our investments are in each language, um, and so I remember we had I think 10 or 11 client libraries were already supported, and we were looking to expand it. And there were these two new languages that were interesting, and it was Scala and Go. And at the time, Martin Ordersky, the Scala creator, was offering a free course on Scala. I thought, well, I better take that. And Go had nothing like that. And so I took the Scala course, and I loved the ideas that it presented to me, and I struggled so much. It just felt to me like it wasn't the right language for me. It thought about things in the opposite way that my mind thinks about things. And then I went on and discovered, the next thing was, okay, no, now I'm going to learn Go. And within 2 weeks, maybe less, I was like, oh, this thinks exactly how my brain thinks. And I went from, like, priding myself on being a polyglot and all these languages to, I don't ever want to write another language. And I just immersed myself in Go. And so, and like my first project was Hugo. That was my project to learn Go. Like, I knew I wanted, for me, I learned things by building actual things. I can't build just toys. I have to actually build something. And so I thought it was, well, at this point I'd used Drupal and WordPress through the years for my website. And I honestly usually don't blog enough to, like, I was spending more time doing WordPress security updates than I was blogging. And I thought, my content never changes. Why do I have this dynamic thing? I'm paying all this money to a VPS, and I should just do static content. And I tried some of the static generators out there at the time, and none of them really worked the way I thought they should. I bet you it goes faster. Like Jekyll, I ported my thing to Jekyll. It took 5 minutes to build my 100-page blog, and I thought, I bet Go is faster than this. And so that was the catalyst to begin Hugo.
The Hugo is mine. Some of all the products that you've built um, in Go since you started, but the Hugo one is mind blowing to me. The Ardan Labs website is built in Hugo. Um, it's just like mind blowing that you had that in your head. That sort of system that can do all the things we're doing for a commercial website, right? Without all that heaviness around it. Eric is a Hugo expert at this point, right? We've been using it almost, I don't know how many years, Steve, almost from the time it came out. Just mind blowing what you thought about there.
It's probably 10 years now since it's came out. Yeah, that's crazy. Um, I think part of it was I just spent so much time building websites over these decade and a half by this point that I had formulated a real sense of what works and what didn't work, and I did it across many different frameworks and languages, and so like I just I had a pretty good idea of what. And I always like whenever I do this, I always start with the end experience in mind and work backwards. And so I knew what experience I wanted for Hugo. I had no idea how to write Go yet, or even if this was possible. But started from the experience and worked my way backwards. And when a library didn't exist that worked the way it needed to, then I'd write it. Um, and luckily, a lot of them did exist, and so I was able to leverage the good work the community had already done for much of it. But yeah, it was a great project. A little embarrassing to have your learning project be the one that is the popular one, but
Yeah, but you built a community around this product. So I imagine that a lot of stuff got cleaned up from those.
oh yeah, by now it's in good shape. Bjorn took it over many years ago. Fantastic programmer, really. It's his. The vision is his now. Yeah, I took it. My vision was realized many years ago, and he's been driving the vision forward for at least 5 years.
So I'm grateful for the time you had from leaving Mongo to work on this stuff, but at some point you must decide I want to get back into industry. So what happens there at some point? What's your next gig?
So my next gig is Docker, and by this point, you and I are both becoming quite involved in the Go community. From the first GopherCon to Gotham Go, and all the different community meetups, and all this all the work that we were both doing at the time, along with lots of other people, um, and like I had begun to I guess get some recognition around building communities around open source products. Um, and so Solomon, who's the head of Docker, the founder of Docker, um, we just started getting to know each other and talking about different ideas of how we could grow the Docker community, how we could refine the Docker experience, and that led to a partnership of me joining to work directly with them on all things open source and Docker core experience.
Right. Your role there was to, um, I'm going to use the word sort of clean up the developer experience. So they had a more, they felt more at home if they wanted to participate and work with Docker from an open source perspective.
I would say part of the role was to refine the developer experience, but more of the role was around strategy and figure out how like Docker at this point, like to Solomon and the team's credit, Docker was already growing really quickly. Like they didn't need help building, they needed help steering. Right, like the engine, the rocket was already taking liftoff, and they needed help figuring out what the destination should be for this. And so a lot of it was uh, I did lead the core engineering team, and we did focus on refinements to that experience, but that was not the primary thing. The primary thing was really figure out where can Docker go, both as a company as well as a product, and um, things that came out of that work were the creation of CNCF um, and trying to like figure out how to best, and the open container initiative, which we don't really talk about much anymore, but at the time was a really big effort, and just trying to help the whole community, the whole industry consolidate around an experience in the standard.
I mean, we think of Docker now as a de facto tech, but at the time he started, it wasn't. Not every developer was using it. Not every developer even had a reason to use it just yet. The platforms that we have today that are all essentially container driven didn't exist. So when you were there, super. In fact, I would say you were there at the right time. The tech was fairly solid. Now you needed a way of bringing it to the developers.
And also help build the open source community and the contributor community. We that was a big. We hosted the first ever open source athon. That's what we called it, where we held these contributor workshops. I think it was 10 cities around the world, all on the same day, Docker's birthday, or maybe not the exact same day, but all around the same, targeting around that same, and and we got hundreds of contributors to Docker, and built a lot of excitement around it. So it's an interesting tool because it's usually operations and developers have different tools and everything, but Docker really spanned across everything.
It becomes the handoff. I'm always looking for the handoff between dev and ops. You got to have that handoff, and it becomes one of these handoff points in the process. So, how long are you at Docker? You're Docker for like 2 years. 2 years.
Docker for just under a year.
Oh, I thought you were there for like 2 years. So you're there for just under a year, and this next, I think, amazing opportunity. I hate when I know a little bit about the guest's timeline because I think it makes me steer a little bit more. But you had this great opportunity that comes up.
You were on the timeline with me for part of that.
I know.
In fact, I remember early on, Bill and I would call each other about Go code and kind of give each other do some pair programming or code reviews as we were both learning it. And yeah, I definitely called Bill for advice multiple times through these things.
Yeah,
so,
I remember we had.
You don't know the timeline. You were on the timeline.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't necessarily share that we had conversations when you were at these reflection points about what you wanted to do next. But I remember this one because I probably was more excited than you were when you had an opportunity to join the Go team. I was giddy almost, I think, because I knew what you could do for the Go community. I mean, I was being selfish, I think, but having you there to help the Go community, because I still am, but really involved in trying to grow that, and to have you there, I was probably being selfish when I was like pushing you to go take that job.
I don't think so, but we were very aligned in that goal, right, of building the Go community. So it was good advice, and it worked out.
Let's just talk a little bit about that time in. I want to ask some questions because I don't know about you, but especially me at that time, maybe a little bit less now, because as you get to know people, sometimes the novelty goes away a little bit. But like Russ Cox and Rob Pike and Rob Griesemer are these like superstars in your head, right? Like I'm not worthy to even talk to them. And now you got to go in and not just talk to them. You're now like almost really entrenched in everything that they're doing and participating in all the conversations. Some of that had to be surreal at the beginning, or were you just grounded because you had the experience you have?
No, super surreal. So I would say the greatest part of that job was a weekly meeting called Proposal Review Committee with the gentleman you just mentioned, along with I don't want to leave out anyone, and there was a bit of a revolving door, but them plus Brad Fitzpatrick, um, and um, Ian, and then there were others that came in and out, but that was kind of the core group of the three founders plus Russ and Ian and Brad, and then me. I felt like if you remember, the 1992 Dream Team was in basketball. The Olympic Dream Team was these like iconic people: Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and then Christian Laettner. Right, Christian Laettner, greatest, maybe the greatest college basketball player of all time, but not Michael Jordan, not Larry Bird. Um, and that's what I felt like. I felt like I was Christian Laettner, like the one that was the college kid that they put alongside the pros. So they had one college kid with all the pros, and that's what I felt like. I was like lifted up to a league that was just beyond me. But in those meetings, like I remember the first few months, I didn't say a word. I just sat there and watched. Like we're talking 20 plus meetings, and I'm just sitting there watching the whole time. And anyone who knows me knows I'm not a shy person. Um, but I was just like trying to learn and observe, and I just really felt out of my depth and a bit starstruck. And um, but slowly I found my voice, um, and it probably took a good year before I felt like I could have conversations with all those people without getting nervous.
It's almost like to feel safe that you could say something and not be I don't know, feel like you're going to say something stupid. I don't know what it is. I can't put it in words.
It's nerves. Like I think it's just nerve. I don't even know if there's something attached to it. It's just nerves when you're around people that you looked up to. Like I've looked up to the people on the Go team since I was in high school. Like not necessarily all of them, but many of them, right? Since like forever. And then it's just weird when you finally meet people that shaped so much of your life and what you ended up doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I just that was fascinating to me that you were and then you got to be a real influence in decision making and helping guide the team to maybe move in directions that they maybe wouldn't have or didn't think about because you had that average developer and product management in your head, which to me was fantastic for Go.
Yeah, the role grew over time into eventually, and for the last probably, I was at Google for 6 years on the Go team the whole time. The last probably 4 years, maybe a little more, was you know the I think the ideal thing is you have an engineering manager, product manager, and at Google sometimes they have a tech lead, which is different than the engineering manager, and it was the case. So it was Russ, Samir, and myself as the three partners leading different roles and responsibilities, but all leading parts of the team, and that partnership worked really well. Although it took time to find its footing, but once we did find our footing, it was really strong partnership.
What do you think you were most proud of during your time there that you can talk about?
I might give you a couple things. One was um, shifting the culture on the Go team a bit to like I remember something I said so often is to the Go team was like initially they were building Go for themselves, and that's the right thing at the beginning. But at some point, when you wanted to go to the mainstream developers, they're not mainstream developers. Like no one, everyone on the Go team, as we're talking about, is exceptional in almost every way that you can define the word exceptional. And so it was helping them realize that they're not building it for themselves. Like they are not the average Go developer, and that took that took a while for that message to sink in. But when it did, it sunk in really well, and there was a big shift in how they approached everything from talks to conversations on GitHub and other forums on the mailing list to how we structured the website. It just shifted a lot. I think the second thing was, when I joined, I already worked at Docker and MongoDB, both used Go as well as all the open source stuff. So I had a pretty good understanding of what problems I saw, and one of the biggest ones was dependency management, and being able to do the research to figure out how what shape that solution needed to take, and then working with the team and community to and then moving the whole community from the original dependency management over to modules, and doing that without disrupting things, like a tremendous accomplishment. And it was a team effort, like certainly not, none of these are like Steve's successes, they're the Go team successes. But being able to be a part of that, and in some cases the catalyst for some of the changes that happened, is just great.
I would argue that's the most important milestone, more than generics, uh, to be able to have a real ecosystem where people could come in and use the product. That was such a pain point, and I appreciated at the time Rob Pike saying it's intractable, right, and that it's not for them to sort of solve. So, however you whispered in their ear that this needed to be solved, um, it's just huge. I think if we don't have modules, I don't think we see the growth that we have seen, since.
Yeah, I think it's definitely part of that. I think these two things together, like really that shift in mentality, like of mindset, led to being able to make the second change too. Um, but yeah, it was tremendous experience. Learned a ton. Really, just pleased with how it all turned out. Like I don't I don't think ever again will there ever be a team like the Go team assembled, right? And even now, like Rob's retired, Ken's retired, like the team um, that was there, and the window of time that I was able to be a part of it was just fantastic.
I got to be on a team, I'm going to say like that, almost one of my first jobs in the early, or my mid 90s, mid to late 90s. Those teams are magical, dude. You just everybody's doing amazing things and working together and enhancing each other's, not just even work, but lives. And you get to have that for maybe, you had it for 6 years. I had it for like 4. And when you get on one of these magical teams, I've never been on it again. I've never had that, again, really at that level. So I appreciate what you're saying. It's just magical when all that, when those people can come together. So now I'm sad because at some point you start talking to me that you're ready to move on from the Go team, and now my brain's going, oh no, like we're gonna lose Steve, so we're gonna lose all of the goodness. Again, I'm being selfish, but I'm gonna say this. I think you found your mini me, because Cameron, uh, I feel like if I close my eyes sometimes, I feel like you're still there in spirit at some level. Like, obviously, he doesn't sound like you and he doesn't talk like you, but I feel like you found, I don't know. I met Cameron, and all that sadness and weight sort of lifted off my shoulders. So thank you for that.
Cameron was very fortunate that he fell into the team and Google when he did. And I was worried too about leaving. Like I didn't want to leave this great team without a product partner. Like that's a critical with product needs to provide tension to engineering, and that tension is like, I like to use a bridge as a metaphor. Like, think of the Brooklyn Bridge. Like, what holds the bridge up? It's tension. All those big cables providing tension are holding it up. And so without product management providing the tension, um, engineering is not going to be successful. And so knowing that, like, I knew when I joined the team 6 years earlier, I knew where I wanted to take it. I knew the problems I wanted to solve. I actually even wrote them all out before I even joined Google, saying this is what I want to focus on. Generics was not on the list. I didn't think that was. I thought that was a non-starter. But the other things, everything on the list we checked off. And then I stuck around another year to work on generics because I didn't even imagine that as a possibility. Um, and also to help Cameron to be able to ramp up and get in the position to be able to take it. So Cameron was huge, just a godsend that he showed up when he did and was able to hand off and also, like, as I said, I started with those ideas. I executed those ideas. We needed someone with fresh perspective to be able to write the next list of ideas and to know where it needed to go next. And I knew that wasn't me. Like, I needed to go back into the industry to experience, uh, writing code and everything, not building the language, but using the language and doing all the things, so I could build up another set of experiences.
Right. And now that leads you to where you are today. And the company you're working for, like, we can't talk much about it. We know that because it's money and regulation and the whole 9 yards. But when we were talking about this next company, I felt like, I don't know if I felt you were super excited about it, but you felt like it was a good complement to the rest of the work that you'd sort of done in the past. So I'm kind of curious now that you've been there for how long? You've been there now? 6 months?
A year.
A year? My God, man, I can't even
Yeah.
keep track of time. So I'm just going to ask: is the job? What aspects of the job are what you thought they were going to be, and maybe what wasn't going into it? And I'm asking this question because we all have these thoughts about that next job, but right. And sometimes I look at Steve sometimes just like this guy just has got it all put together. He's got everything mapped out. But no, right? Like there are things
Definitely
where
not.
they were right and there are things where they weren't what you thought. So I'd love to hear that.
So I knew I wanted to move on from the Go team from Google, try something new. Um, and I was interviewing at a bunch of different companies, many of which were probably a more logical next step. Like, they used Go, they're open source focused, um, and and then I interviewed at Two Sigma. And Two Sigma is interesting. I actually interviewed with them almost 10 years earlier when I was leaving MongoDB. And I remember thinking to myself, it was the right place at the wrong time. And partly that was because, we it is more of a confidential nature of what we're working on here. And I really wanted to participate more in the broad industry. And I remember thinking this is the right place for my career, but later. And it just so happened that there were some pivots that were happening internally that led to this new position being created right at the right time. And so I remember having a positive experience earlier with my interviews, and then I began having these conversations again with them, and I had a bunch of interviews. Like, it's an interesting position, and you're always kind of feeling out both sides. And Two Sigma definitely likes to get to know the people who are people work here for a generally long time, so we really like to get to know the people. Um, and so I had a really interesting experience that every single person I interviewed with at Two Sigma, I got excited about working with. I said, this is the person I want to work with. And I was like, if the rest of the company's like this, I'm gonna be in heaven. Um, and it turned out the rest of the company so I joined without a lot of clarity around the role, um, and uh, and partly because I had to come here and shape the role a bit. But I knew it was a product role, and I knew kind of the general nature of what I was responsible for. Um, but joining it, it's been great. I remember thinking like I'll never have a team like I did at Google again with that caliber of people, um, and like probability wise, that was the right way to think. But I found it. So I'm feeling like I got, struck gold at the end of two rainbows, right? Like just two great experiences. Um, just a stellar team here, working on incredibly hard problems, and really supportive and nurturing, and like it's really just a great atmosphere to be a part of, and like I'm learning a ton. Two Sigma has really pioneered a lot of machine learning and data science. They're very active in the open source side of that as well, and so that was an area I didn't have much background in. I wanted to. I could see. I think that's where the future is going. Um, and so to be a part of the company that's pushing that envelope forward is just awesome.
You said something that sort of was interesting to me. I mean, I've owned my own business probably, well, not probably, since 2004. And so I know there are things you're allowed to talk about and not talk about from a business perspective. But I've never had um, a level of like contractual silence that I see when people go work at Google and Apple and some of these other companies. And you had that at Google, but I feel like at Sigma, Two Sigma, it's even a bigger padlock. And so I've never had this weighing down on me. And so I'm always wondering when people work at Google and Apple and like now Two Sigma, um, do you feel that? Do you feel stress in knowing that you have to be ridiculously careful about every word that comes out of your mouth when you're talking about that? Even at Google, right? The tech and the company. I've never had it, so I feel like there's stress with me talking to, say, you, knowing that I have to be really careful what question I ask because I don't want to put somebody in a position where they make a mistake.
I think you probably feel more stress than I do, and I'll tell you why. Is you learn pretty early the things that like there's intellectual property and trade secrets and other things at all these companies that are clearly things you don't talk about openly anywhere. Like these are fairly confidential things, and then there's public things, and and I've been fortunate to be involved in open source at both, which is an easy public thing to talk about. Anything that's open source is something that we can engage with and talk about, and so you kind of have your speaking points that you can cover, and the other ones that you shouldn't spend too much time on, or really should avoid completely. Um, but I don't feel stress about it, especially not in a friendly conversation.
Do you feel a lack of freedom at some level now too? Maybe you got that at Google too, where uh, a lack of freedom to say, and maybe this is why you said now is the right time. Where before you really wanted to be out there front and center, you wanted to be that person that was making change, but in the public eye. This role really requires you to be in the private, right? You can't necessarily be a public figure anymore.
I think, I mean, I've still, ever since joining Two Sigma, I still spoke at GopherCon, and I was the MC at Gotham Go, and I'm still involved in the Go community. My heart's still very much with Go. Like I still write Go often, um, and um, so like I can be a public figure, but that's Steve, the public figure, not Steve at Two Sigma, the public figure. Although there's some of that element with it too, as we're getting more involved with open source. We've been involved for a long time, but I'm getting more involved in our open source activities. And so there's that. I think the other thing is just, Google, and all my previous companies, my user base was external. I was always building for the masses. Here, my primary user base is internal. That's been a bit of a shift, but it's been a great shift. It's been really nice to be able to, um, get to know our users, captive audience, and spend more time with them and really understand the experience that's right for them.
So is that the one big difference when you have the internal customer? You have more intimate access to that person when you need it?
Yeah, it's we went. It's just a magnitude less of users too, or several magnitudes less. Like, we had millions of users of Go, um, and there's no way you can even create enough personas to really cover all of them. Whereas here, we can name our users. Like, it's a very different. It's very much more intimate.
Hi, Steve. So my last question, because we've been talking for 2 hours, and I knew this was going to happen because I just wanted to. There was so much I wanted to talk to you. I'm 54, so obviously I got 10 years on you. But I just had this conversation with my business partner Ed actually today, right? I told him, dude, I'm tired. I'm ready to kind of sell. Like I'm ready to be done. I've done, I think, everything that I want to do in terms of blogging, books, speaking, teaching. I don't see any. The only thing I was telling Ali today that I'd like to teach my workshop to a room of 1,000 people. I've talked to 1,000 people, but do an 8-hour workshop and keep 1,000 people engaged. That sounds challenging to me, right? And Ed says, "Well, Bill, I don't want to sell. What am I going to do after this?" I'm like, Ed, I think there's a product that you and I could just go back into a room and hide and build. And this is how we met, right? And that was some of the best time of our lives. Just like just disappear for a couple of years and build something. We can do that, right? Um, so that's kind of where I am right now. Um, I don't see you're there right now, but at some point, I imagine. Do you ever think about, you know what? I want to walk away from tech and get back into philosophy and maybe finish that graduate degree and go back and just have a different life. Like I've done everything I want to do in tech, so now I want to go back and pursue something in philosophy.
I don't know. I'm definitely not there, and I just love learning and trying new things. And so, like, Two Sigma is a great opportunity to do that. I've also always done side projects, written books, like the open source things. Right now, I'm working on an AR video game with a bunch of friends as a side gig, um, called Skate Tricks. It's available on both mobile stores, but so, like, I don't know. Like, I think I'll always be pursuing these side interest things, and at some point, I'll be done with the 9 to 5 and or whatever it is. But having a boss and just want to focus on more side gigs. But um, as long as I'm still learning and building cool stuff and doing alongside people that I really enjoy spending time with, like, I don't know, I'll do this till I'm done.
Philosophy hasn't come back into your brain ever since you took that job and didn't go to grad school.
Not a professorship. Like, I love teaching, and I love what I learned from philosophy, and I use it every day. I really use it. Like, analytical thinking is such a critical skill. Analytical writing and reading and thinking. But now maybe at the sunset of my career, I'd go and teach at a university level, but I don't think philosophy. I think probably, I've spent decades now in the industry building up this experience. It's probably the right thing to pass along.
Brilliant. All right, we're like 2 hours in, so I have to let you go, even though I don't want to. Steve, if anybody wanted to reach out to you after listening to this, we'll put that in the show notes. What's the best way for somebody to just sort of ping you? You're not on Twitter anymore.
It's not called Twitter anymore, right? It's called
Oh,
X.
sorry,
Um,
X.
and I'm on Blue Sky, but I'm not active on really any nowadays. Um, I don't know.
Oh,
Twitter's probably right,
we'll figure it out.
or whatever it is called now.
All right, beautiful. All right, Steve, thank you for hanging out for the whole 2 hours I asked you to put aside. All right, this is Steve Francia and Bill Kennedy signing off from the Ardan Labs podcast, and I hope to see everybody again real soon.